was really interested in my side of the story. The narrative around what took place was that, unfortunately, a young man like Ben Wilson, who had so much promise, was taken away. A dream unfulfilled, promise unfulfilled, like a tragedy to the community. And I was the culprit. But in Benji, the filmmakers, Cootie and Chike, the guys who directed it, they wanted to talk about Benji in a way to, highlight, what was lost, but also to tell the story of what really happened. And they gave me an opportunity for the first time, somebody took an interest and wanted to know my side of the story. So Benji wasn't about me. And when my uncle asked me to come speak, he said, I want to show the documentary Benji. I was like, I don't think that would be such a good idea to show that documentary. But
It was. Yeah.
well, it wasn't about me, but it gave me a chance to really tell my side of the story. That was about Benji, the tragic loss. And I took that opportunity, and I'm like, yeah, if you guys are gonna give me the opportunity, I'm gonna tell my side of the story. And when Unc asked me to come talk, I said, yeah, I'll come speak, because what I do from the time that I came home from prison up until now has pretty much been what my life has been about. Before my incident with Benji, I was a kid growing up on the south side of Chicago, just like any other kid. I love sports. I went to school. My father passed away when I was 15 years old, cancer. He was a young man, 33 years old. Him and my mother were separated, but he was very much active in my life. And he was a guiding force. And when I lost him, it was pretty much a time in my life when I needed somebody the most to help guide me, a young male teenager, just starting to understand the world around me. And I got pulled off into, the influence of Chicago.
And cut loose.
Exactly. If anybody know anything about Chicago, Chicago has a gang culture that runs deep. And, I was not unique to being influenced by that. So sometimes thinking carrying a gun was a cool thing to do, you realize that it's not, because when you pick up a gun, you get gun problems. And I got a gun problem. Unfortunately, Benji had this confrontation. We all know what happened. And I went away for 20 years. I did 20 years in prison. The only thing I wanted people to understand was that it was a mistake, right? And that I had to somehow show people that I wasn't the person that, the media and everybody painted me to be. So I was fortunate enough to have a son too, right? And in the back of my mind, I always felt like the 20 years I'd done wasn't going to be sufficient for what I had done. I never thought that just doing 20 years, I always felt like I was going to have to give up a greater sacrifice for what I had done. And I didn't realize that until the day my son was killed. My son was killed in 2017, July 6, 2017. And the moment I got the call that he had got shot, I was far north at Northeastern Register for school. I received a call that my son was shot. So I'm trying to rush back to the scene. He got shot literally 2 blocks away from where I grew up at. I got another call maybe 20 minutes later. My cousin said they would put the tape up around the car. And I asked her, was he still in the car? And she said, yes. So at that moment, I knew he had died. And then I thought about the sacrifice. I felt like this was what I had to give up in order to truly understand what I had taken away. I had understood that. So I became a victim of gun violence after understanding what it was like to be a perpetrator of gun violence. But I never knew the grief that I had inflicted until that day. I had an idea, but I never knew how deep it went. And when the world witnessed my mistake, they wanted blood, they wanted my life, they wanted to take everything from me. And I thought about the young men who were responsible for killing my son. And I knew at that moment I had to forget it in my heart, because I understood that they were they were caught up in that same cycle of ignorance that I was caught up in when I had made the mistake that I had made. And I talk about that being a mistake because I know that we do things without understanding the full consequence and impact that we cause, until we able to learn from these mistakes and hopefully grow better, right? Society was ready to throw me away for the rest of my life because of my mistake. And for me to harbor any hatred or retribution towards the young men who had did what they did to my son, I would be just as guilty as everybody who I felt should have at least wanted to hear why I did what I did. No one asked me. I seen Jesse Jackson one day, maybe 3 years ago. And Jesse Jackson, you know, back then, when Benji had died, had really aligned himself with Benji's family. I had no problem with that. But I told Jesse Jackson, I do have a problem with you over one thing, because you being as iconic within our community as you were. I said, one thing you could have done was just said, let me go ask that young man, why did he do what he did? And maybe out of that, you would have changed the narrative surrounding me and left a different impression in people's minds about what I had done. I mean, you went over to Iran and got hostages released. You know, you ran for president as the first Black man. You could have said, this young man is a part of the community just as much as Benji. Let me see why he did it. But we made peace, because I don't want to hold any grudges against somebody like Jesse Jackson, right? I was good with that because he asked me at that time, okay, well, tell me. And I did. In my book, Until the Lion Speak, it comes from an African proverb. The tail of the hunt would always glorify the hunter until the lion speaks. And that touched me when I heard that, because I felt like when I got caught up with the situation of Benji, the narrative was painted about me was that I was a young Black gangbanger thug who took somebody's life away. They painted me in that box. I was 16 years old. The mistake I made couldn't have took no more than 5 minutes, but that summed up my entire life. And then basically said that I was deserving to never have a chance to redeem myself. But that wasn't what happened. They said we tried to rob Benji. There was a confrontation between me and Benji. He was having a bad day. I had a gun and I got gun problems. And as a result, Benji lost his life, right? I never tried to minimize what I've done. I never tried to re-victimize Benji. What I've done was wrong. I did 20 years. Benji would never come back. So what I did, I made a conscious decision, was to say, well, no matter how long I live, I could never bring Benji back. But I'm gonna dedicate myself to trying to save as many young men as I can who come up in the same circumstances and live within those same small margins that me and Benji did. Because Benji lived in the margins too. He just had a talent to take him outside of those margins. I had a talent, you know, but it wasn't realized until now, where I can come out and share my story with people. That's why I say, well, ask me to come talk. Absolutely, I'm gonna come talk. Because for a long time, nobody wanted to hear what I had to say, right? I wrote my book because I wanted people to understand my pedigree. I wanted them to understand what I came from and what I'm doing now, what my life is about. So when he talked about the Benji, I was a little apprehensive, because Benji is not my story. It's a highlight of a mistake that I made. And it's a tragic story of a life that was taken away, who had so much promise. But I told him, I said, but I'm a part of this documentary called All These Sons that they made back in 2018. I don't work for Iman anymore. I work for Chicago Cred. Chicago Cred is an organization committed to reducing gun violence in Chicago. It was started by former Secretary of Education under Obama, Arnie Duncan. But Arnie Duncan funded Iman program. That's how I got my job working for Iman. So I've been working pretty much for Chicago Cred when I started working for Iman. Story about me and Arnie Duncan. I love Arnie Duncan. One of the most smartest people I ever met, humble guy, right? Arnie Duncan and Ben Wilson were friends because Arnie Duncan grew up playing basketball. He played pro ball over in Australia. But Arnie Duncan, as a teenager, grew up on the south side of Chicago, and he played with Benji. They played pickup games, they played in tournaments, they were friends. And Arnie hated me for all those years. Arnie said, I can remember the day I found out I was in my dorm room at Harvard. I got a call, Benji had been shot and killed. And I just held hatred for him all these years. Arnie said when he saw the 30 for 30 Benji, because that came out in 2012, he was watching it, and then when my part came on, he just turned the TV off. Arnie was another person who didn't want to hear what I had to say. Fast forward to 2017, when he came back to Chicago to start Chicago Cred, because Arnie said that he lost at least one child every 2 weeks as the head of CPS to gun violence in Chicago, and he wanted to do something about that. He wanted to stop it. You know, he wanted to help to see if he could reduce people, you know, from killing each other. What people don't know, Chicago has had nothing less than 400 homicides since 1965. That's bare minimum. We killing almost 40,000 people in the last 50 some years. So he wanted to be a part of history of reducing gun violence. I want to stand on the right side of history too. I want that to be my legacy. I don't want my legacy to be the person who killed Ben Wilson. I want my legacy to be the person who saved as many lives as possible because I was a part of that. And Arnie gave me the opportunity. So when he found out that I was working for Iman, I was introduced to Arnie on a peace march with Father Flaker a month after my son had got killed. And the guy introduced me, he said, you know, this is Billy. And he asked me, okay, I'm familiar with your story, but I want to hear what you got to say. And I told him as we marched for peace, and from that day on, Arnie forgave me and basically took me around the country talking about the work we do. Not so much about me and my background about Benji, but about the work that I do for Chicago Cred and Iman. I've lost, since I've been doing this work with Iman, I've lost 11 young men to gun violence. And it hurts. I just recently buried my last participant 2 weeks ago. I had, from March of 2020 to September, I lost 4 young men within that 6 months. So I lost 11 young men in the last 5 years of doing this work that I've directly worked with. But I've worked with over 200 young men. And I don't think that I'm winning because 11 out of 200 is not a good number for me. I don't want to lose nobody. I lost myself, I lost my son, I lost Benji. I don't want to lose nobody that I'm working with. So I stand in the gap and I let these young guys know, you don't have to go through 20 years in prison to realize your greatness. You know, because some people never believe in your greatness if you make one mistake.
Right. Can I ask something?
Absolutely.
What went on during your interrogation?
So when I was arrested, I was 16 years old, I was a juvenile. And they arrested my co-defendant first, Omar Dixon. They arrested me. My interrogation went like this. My mother demanded to see me. She should have been allowed to see me because I was a juvenile. They arrested her at the police station. Yes, they did.
For what? What did they?
Because she refused to leave because she demanded to see me.
Thank you.
And I didn't know that they had arrested her, but in an interrogation, they came with a pre-prepared statement. And they was basically saying that we attempted to rob Benji. And I told them that's not true. They said the Omar went through his pockets. I said, that's not true. I asked for a lawyer. What they did was sent in the assistant state's attorney, which I didn't know any different. I didn't know who the assistant state's attorney. I didn't know that he wasn't advocating for me, that he was there to prosecute me. I was 16, totally ignorant of the law. And they basically came with the same prepared statement. And they interrogated us for like 6-7 hours. And I eventually signed a statement against myself. So
Get out of that room.
yeah, but that's the way the criminal justice system is designed. For those who are unfortunate enough to be able to, support themselves through a process like this. Criminal justice system is designed basically to cycle you in, and if you think about it, everything, when you think about the structural racism of America, right? Certain communities are basically at a disadvantage and are more likely to end up, involved in the criminal justice system. My mother didn't have no money to afford no lawyer. When she demanded to see me as a juvenile, she should have been present. But at the same time, if I'm asking for a lawyer, questioning stops immediately. And they give you a lawyer. They sent there the assistant state's attorney.
I spent some time in Tanzania. And before I went there, I was told, stay away from the police. And if you have any interaction with the police, you can expect to leave that with no money. And that rang in my mind all the while I was there. And that gave me a perspective on the relationship between the police and the Black community. It's the same kind of situation. You don't want interaction with the police.
I'm gonna tell you a story. I write about it in my book. So I was 702. What that means is I was charged as an adult. And this situation took place, it was 41 days before my 17th birthday. So I was sent to the juvenile detention center, still charged as an adult. And once I turned 17, I was transferred to the Cook County Jail. My father had two brothers that worked at the Cook County Jail. His older brother, Lawrence, who played for the Negro League, Kansas City Monarchs years ago, he came up right after Ernie Banks came to the Cook, right? And then my uncle, Ralph, both of them worked in the Cook County Jail. And the reason why I say that is because they saved my life. When I turned 17, the next day I was transferred to Division 6 Cook County, 26 in California. The first day that I got there, I was in my cell, right? They give you your little property or whatever. So I'm putting my shoes on. And I look out the door and I see 6 correctional Cook County Sheriff deputies coming to the wing. And something in my spirit told me this don't look good. Something ain't right about this picture. And I hear them call my name over the intercom. So I get a pen and a piece of paper and I write my mother's name, a phone number down. I tell the guy, call my mother right now and tell her to come out. They called me out and they asked me what was I locked up for. Everybody in the world at that time knew what I was locked up for, right? So I refused to answer. I just didn't say nothing. I told them, my lawyer told me not to talk about my case. They proceeded to jump on me in the hallway, drag me to the captain's office, and then handcuff me in a chair and beat me, basically. At one point, the captain told me, take him away, do whatever you want to do with him. So 2 of the white guards, I never forget his name, Sergeant Zurich and Officer Bosco. Instead of taking me back to the dorm, they took me and put me in, we got in the elevator, we went in the basement of Division 6 into the boiler room. I'm handcuffed. They told me that I was gonna write a letter to my mother saying that I couldn't cope. I just turned 17 years old, right? So in my mind, this was probably gonna be the last day of my life. But I also said to myself, I'm not ready for that. It's always been something inside of me from that moment. I never knew until that moment that whenever I'm faced with something that's real challenging, I just dig deep down inside of myself and determine what I'm gonna do and what I'm not gonna do. I determined what I wasn't gonna do is write a letter. So if you're gonna kill me, then kill me, but it won't be by my hand. And I was praying that God called my mother, she answered the phone, and he did and she did. And what happened was she called my uncles, told them to get out to the jail, right? So they called her and they trying to find out because they don't know that I'm related to these guys. My Uncle Ross at that time had been working in the jail, man. He knew everybody. Everybody knew him, right? It seemed like I was down there for hours, and they spitting on me. They called me the N word, it was like that was my middle name or something. The way it was coming out their mouth, and the phone rang. So they ended up taking me out, right? Because Zuri told me, he said, you won't be leaving this room alive. This was January 2nd, 1985. He said, you would not leave out of this room alive. So I left out of that room alive. My uncles rushed to the jail. My mother knew. My grandmother, they came out there, they was demanding to see me. Long story short, I survived that moment, right? So I felt like, okay, whatever I'm faced throughout this ordeal,
easier than this.
I'm gonna be ready for it. I'm gonna be ready for it. I'm gonna be strong enough to deal with whatever I need to deal with and survive. Because I believe I wasn't meant. It had, what their intent was to leave up out of there alive. But I was just a little bit smart enough to see what was going on. Write my mother's number down, have them call, because they have killed people in the county jail. And this was in the 80s,
Not just in Chicago.
Yeah, but Cook County in particular was notorious for killing inmates.
Right.
They had a reputation for that,
And labeled it a suicide.
Yeah, so I made it out of that. But fast forward to my book, I felt like, the narrative painted around Billy Moore and the Benji Wilson situation, made me seem like, I was the most horrible human being walking the planet. The hunter was telling his story. So once I decided to write my book, the lion spoke. And I tell my story and I talk about, my upbringing. Of course, I address the situation that took place with me and Benji. I talk about my time in prison. I talk about me coming home. My family teases me because when I came home, they was like, you act like you ain't never left. Donnie will tell you, Donnie, like, every time we see you, you doing something that's progressive, you moving forward. And I felt like I didn't have no time to waste. I did enough time to where I need to get out here and I need to get busy.
Had you forgiven yourself?
Good question. I was talking to my father's mother, my grandma older, and I was telling her, I was like, man, I don't know how to really just accept the fact that, I'm responsible for somebody not being here. Like, that's hard because at night I think about me standing in front of the Creator, explaining that, I did this. Like, and she said, listen, there's nothing you can do about that. Just try to be the best person you can. You gotta forget yourself. I said, how do I do that? She said, you just gotta. She said, I tell you what, don't be the person that they think you are.
Mm-hmm.
Be the total opposite. And I just decided from that point on, I would forgive myself. I can't bring Benji back. And at some point I said that if I can, I'm gonna try to save as many young men as I can. And that's my life work. So when you see all these sons, that's what I told my uncle. I say, Benji, they can watch it. It'll give them a little context, but make sure they see all these sons. You know?
And all these sons, you was leading a group and asking boys in the group, could they forgive? And one young man said, he ain't ready to forgive yet. He ain't gonna never forgive. Did that brother ever come to terms with that?
Absolutely. You talking about Zay Manning. Yeah. You know, Zay, so the thing about the program is that if you in our program, you have to be willing to forgive the person who have harmed you, because 80% of the young men that we work with been shot. Y'all remember Lil Charles? He got shot 21 times. I mean, they actually stood over Lil Charles, shot him all in his head and everything. He woke up 3 months later. He had to learn how to walk a year later. So if you can't forgive somebody for doing something like that to you, then what's going to end up happening is that your life, you're going to always live your life with anger and hate inside of you. That ain't going to hurt the person that you got that against. It's going to hurt you. I don't know if you guys seen, if we talked about it, but I was able to reconcile with Benji, two youngest brothers, Jeffrey Wilson and Anthony Wilson. And I sat across the table from them. And Jeffrey Wilson told me, he said, you know, my brother was 6'8". Anthony was like 6'5". He said, but I'm mad because I'm 6'1". Because I was mad at you. I think you stunted my growth. I told him just like that, literally. I told him just like this. I said, you can be mad at me all you want. It's killing you.
Yep.
It ain't killing me. Because he told me I was in a state of denial. I say, you got a brother sitting right next to you. You telling me I don't realize what I did? Hey man, I had a son that was murdered. So I definitely understand your grief, but if you want to hate me, continue to hate me. If you don't want to forgive me, I've already forgiven myself. So you hating me is not going to hurt me. It's only going to hurt you. And who want to live life holding on to hurt, regret, hatred, anger? That's not a good way to live for nobody. And sometimes the most challenging things are the things that you got to face and overcome. It ain't easy to forgive somebody that has done something like that to you, you know. But if you want somebody to forgive you, you gotta be willing to forgive somebody. And that's why at the moment, at the very second that I found out my son had died, I was, in my heart, I had forgiven those young men. Because I knew what it was like for the whole world to hate me and not be willing to forgive. There's people walking around right now today that don't forgive me. And you know what I tell them? I said, this took place 38 years ago. You hating a person that don't even exist no more, who was 16 years old. So what does that say for your mind, for your heart? Some of these people are very smart, very intelligent, very progressive. And they locked inside of a mindset that apparently they did not grow 38 years ago.
Stuck in time. How do you get kids to give up a gun?
But these are not kids. These are young men.
All right, young men.
We don't, I'm being quite frank, we don't tell them to put their guns down.
Okay.
We don't. Because everybody got a gun.
Right.
If I tell somebody to put their gun down, you leave them vulnerable.
Right.
But what we do is say, hey, we call it playing defense. Don't go out there looking for no trouble.
Right.
America have a love affair with guns.
Absolutely.
Why should we put our guns down when everybody else ain't? I don't own a gun, but I'm just saying,
Right.
that message don't make sense to tell a young man coming up in a community where everybody got guns that you should put your gun down. He done been shot 4 or 5 times. He done lost 5 close friends and family members. We make sense. We don't talk outside of reality. But what we do is try to work with young men who are at risk of being a victim of gun violence. And I ask the guy all the time, I say, so if you identified your greatest risk to your life right now, who would it be? It's them, okay, guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go work with them too. Because if I'm reducing your risk, I gotta reduce his risk. And that's what we do. And we work with opposing groups. We get them to agree to be not preemptive. And we call it playing defense. You play defense, that means you don't come over here and I won't go over there. And we give these guys both the same love, respect, and services that the other side is getting. Because if I can get you to change your way of thinking about how you see people who you think poses you a harm and do the same for him, then what? We mitigate both of you guys' chances of living. We reduce the risk of you guys killing each other. But we don't tell nobody to put their guns down.
You tell them not to use it.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, it's so much what you just said about forgiveness. When I watched your documentary, what I felt like, oh my, what you're doing, everybody's life has some pain. Nobody gets through life without some pain. That was it's been an enormous amount of pain for you. But you chose, instead of to transmit that pain, you transformed that pain. Using it in a different way. And I'm very curious about where you're working now, because it sounds like you're working on the gun issues. And can you tell us a little bit more about what that organization is up to? And
Absolutely.
I mean, because I guess we have such this tendency in the United States to only get upset about guns when there's a mass shooting, which is it's 1 or 2% of total deaths by guns in the United States. The same weekend as Highland Park, 11 people were killed in Chicago. That was pretty much ignored. And it's kind of like, so I'm wondering what you're up to in that organization, because it's such a problem.
So we work in 2 communities on the south and west side, Roseman and North Mondale. We work with a group of young men who were responsible for like 75% of the shootings in North Mondale, maybe 3 years ago. And we've been able to reduce that community's gun violence problem by 50%. Because we get directly involved with the shooters. We don't judge them. If I brought a shooter in here right now today and just set him in front of you, you guys would probably be like, oh, that guy's, look, he's funny, he's lovable, you know what I'm saying? And he's just like anybody else, once you get to know these young men. But what we do is we have a 5-tier approach to gun violence. The first one is street outreach. So our street outreach team is basically men who are like me, who come from a certain walk of life, maybe done time, but they got what's called an LTO, a license to operate within this community. They got credibility with these individuals. They know them. They used to be gang leaders, So they have a relationship with some of these young guys, where these young guys trust them and they'll listen to them. They from the community. So once the outreach team approaches, we understand the conflicts going on. We have a mapping system. We know all the priority conflicts, the hot spots. We know how many shootings took place in this area. We know how many people were killed. We know who were killed. We know who has a death anniversary coming up. We know everything that we need to know in order to address gun violence. So we want to reduce it. So then what we do is when we recruit these guys, we bring them into program. They introduce them to the setting to a life coach. A life coach is basically a navigation system. We're gonna help you cognitively understand how to push the pause button on your feelings, right? What I tell guys is this. I said, you were born with the greatest gift you was born with was your ability to think. Your most weakest attribute is your feelings. And in a moment of crisis, most people go towards their weakest attribute than their greatest. And then you find yourself always regretting your actions. So it's something that we got to teach these guys how to start leaning more so towards their thinking.
Yeah.
Can you outthink your feelings
Yeah.
in a moment of crisis? Because if you can, then you have less regret. And usually gun violence erupts as some type of emotional situation, right? So that's what we do as life coaches.
Yeah.
And one of the tools we use is cognitive behavioral intervention, which is basically what I just described. How to outthink your feelings, how to understand inside of you when you know you're getting angry, you starting to feel certain triggers, you starting to identify these things. Now, what do you do to interrupt that? So that you don't do something that you'll end up regretting. And then we have clinical therapy. All of our young men are introduced, they have a clinician. See, at one point, that was a stigma, particularly in the African American community. We make it popular. These guys, they go to they share so much. I'm talking about we keep our therapists stocked up with Kleenex. Because, yeah, you know, and they want that, you know, because a lot of these young men have been traumatized. See, it all leads back to trauma. You know, if people understand their trauma, then they understand how not to get triggered. And we as an organization, not only are we trauma informed, but we trauma responsive. Because these young guys, they'll come up in there, they'll cuss us out and everything, you know, like, and then tell you how much they love you the next moment. You know? And I see that as just trauma. I can see past them and understand there's something deep in that. Because I can't trigger their trauma by me trying to help them heal from their trauma. And I can't respond to their trauma in a way to where I get triggered, my trauma get triggered if I'm trying to heal them. We're called wounded healers. Right? We were at some point wounded and we were able to heal from our trauma. So now we helping hurt people, right? But people who have been healed can heal people. And that's what we do. You know, and then we have I talked about outreach, life coach, clinical, then we have our fourth, education. So all of our guys who come to our program, a lot of them they dropped out of high school, whatever. We just had a graduation, literally last Wednesday. 55 people graduated, got their high school diplomas. Not GEDs, it's Penn Foster's accredited high school diploma program. Literally, you can go on our website, Chicago Credit last week, we had 59 people, young men who graduated with their high school diplomas. And then our fifth is ENT, employment and training. We help these guys get trained and employment. So that's the 5-tier approach that we use in Chicago Credit to help reduce gun violence. And this is all Arnie Duncan coming back and implementing, you know, this program. And what we do is also support other organizations that's doing the work as well.
So the city government is not involved in this?
We are fortunate enough to have, you know, private funding, but we're pushing the state. Well, Illinois just got like $250 million for violence reduction. The city of Chicago just started, under Lori Lightfoot, just started a violence reduction department. They only put like 10 million. But if we want to get on par with cities like New York and Los Angeles, who's much bigger than Chicago, they put like $50 to $60 million into their violence reduction programs. So the state of Illinois is putting a lot of money. It's a lot of money coming from the federal government now about violence reduction. Unfortunately, I'm gonna use Arnie's words. Arnie was the Secretary of Education when Sandy Hook took place. He visited those families. And Arnie told me, he said, I thought that, you know, when white people started losing their kids, it was gonna make a difference. It didn't. It did. You know, everybody gotta get involved. You know, people don't need to be able to buy assault weapons. Now young guys got these things called switches. So you could take a switch and convert a semi-automatic to an automatic, and they got extended clips, so they may have 100 drum clip that'll shoot within 5 seconds. 100 rounds within 5 seconds. That means somebody come in this room and annihilate us within 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Everybody. That's the type of artillery they got. Why? You know, what purpose does that serve? You know? So, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. In Highland Park, you know, one day, you know, several people was killed, but in Chicago, every weekend, you have over 50 people shot, 10 people killed every weekend, and it goes unnoticed. We know about mass shootings all the time. It's been taking place. You know, the week my son was killed, That 4th of July weekend was historic in Chicago. Over 100 people were shot and over 20 people were killed. He was number 339 who lost his life that year. Last year, we had 836 people killed in Chicago. 836 people. The highest we had in 25 years.
In one year, the Sun-Times, I think once a week, had on their front page a child who had been killed. Didn't make any impact at all.
Like I said, Sandy Hook didn't make any impact, right?
You know what? It didn't make an impact when was it Scalise, the Republican in DC with the baseball game.
Mhm.
When the Republicans were getting shot, you'd think maybe we'd have a turnaround.
I met Gabby Giffords
Yeah,
about 3 months ago.
wow.
Yeah,
Can I ask you a question?
absolutely.
When you go up to, you just mentioned the gentleman you went to see who did all the shooting. How do you introduce yourself? How do you break into that? He's locked in. He's locked into his thinking, right?
Okay, you talking about just young men who would shoot somebody?
Yes. How do you break into that person? Because his mental state is, this is what I need to lose.
So,
Am I expressing my question
no,
right?
I think I get what you're saying. I haven't met a complete psychopath, you know,
Okay.
and I don't want to meet a psychopath, right? Psychopaths have no remorse whatsoever. They don't see people as people, they see people as objects, right? So we don't have, fortunately, a psychopath. We have young men living in circumstances that, for all intents and purposes, have been neglected. No one has invested in them. I can take you on Madison and Pulaski right now. You'll see buildings that's abandoned that happened when the riots took place after Martin Luther King got killed.
68.
Exactly. There's communities and neighborhoods in Chicago that has totally been disinvested in. That has no type of, sustainable programs. They closed 54 schools in 2016. Guess where those schools were at? Black and brown communities. This 2016. So the young men that's in my program came from those schools. So it ain't that they psychopathic. They just ain't got no hope. They living from these guys ain't got no form of income. And I hate to say this, right? Because back in the 90s and the crack era, it's funny how people were able to get rich selling crack. I could be the crack dealer on the block, and guess what? If everybody lived on the block, everybody in here get rich working with me, right? But then they sent me to federal prison for the rest of my life. Half of y'all became crackheads, had babies that you couldn't take care of. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And now your babies is out here killing people because ain't nobody did nothing for us, right? Now you have the same baby or a grandchild coming up, and it's still basically what it was when they sent granddaddy to prison for the rest of his life. Mama became a crackhead. Now you're trying to figure out how to live your life, right? But the hustle that you're trying to use to sustain yourself, you can't feed everybody. Your hustle may be trying to sell some weed, or you get sophisticated enough where you can use your mind to commit fraud. They call it card cracking. I can't feed the block if I'm cracking cards. So it's like your survival is based off of hustle.
Right.
And depending on how sophisticated you are or not, depending on whether you're gonna survive or not. Because you've been left behind. The schools, your institutions that supposed to sustain and create the next leader and for the next generations to come has been shut down. Everybody in the community basically is on Section 8 or rent. You don't have home ownership. If you got one block in the city of Chicago in North Lawndale, you probably got 2 people that own their houses. You probably got maybe 5 vacant lots, probably 3 abandoned houses and buildings. And that's what it's been like for the last 20, 30 years.
So what's your opening line to that gentleman?
What's my opening line?
Yeah, how do you, hey, I've been there.
Well, for me, it's about reducing your risk of being a victim of gun violence. That's my industry. How do we keep you alive and keep you not from going to kill somebody? Right? You come into this program, you want to go to school, we're gonna make sure you go to school. I just said we graduated 59 people, right? Arnie is so plugged. The president for Southern New Hampshire University gave us a $2 million grant for anybody who want to go get their college degree. We got guys enrolled in that. Hell, I'm 4 classes away from graduating myself.
All right.
I got 2 more semesters left and I have my bachelor's degree. I was initially going to get my bachelor's degree the day I found out my son got killed. I signed up to get my bachelor's degree after I got my associate's degree in prison. The Richard Spade tape came out, they took all the high-level education programs out of prison. So I wasn't really able to pursue what I knew I could get that was gonna put me in a better place when I came home. But I didn't stop. So I'm teaching these young men how to be resilient too. Yeah, the world is against you. You can't be against yourself. You can navigate around obstacles and barriers. It ain't gonna be easy. I guarantee you that, but it's definitely achievable if you put your mind to it, because you don't have to allow society to define who you are. That's for me, the perception of anybody about me will never define what my reality is. I'm gonna be who I decide to be, not based off how you see me. And that's what we gotta teach these young guys, what they need to believe in. And if you want something out of life, you just gonna have to work harder, that's all. You're gonna have to work harder. But we are here to support you. So if you find yourself in our program, then now you finally got somebody that's got your back. If you committed to change, if you committed to keeping your to living and being safer, then you continue to go through our program. And we're gonna do everything. We got people housing, relocated to different states. We done sent people to school. We done got people job careers. We got people now working in law firms and stuff like that. We don't give up on nobody and we don't judge them. But I tell them, y'all gotta stop killing people. I tell them, I say, man, if anybody in here sitting in this room that did kill somebody, I guarantee you got a life sentence waiting on you. We'll never catch up with you. Ain't no statute of limitation for murder. And in Illinois right now, you kill somebody, you're doing 100% of your time. You're going away forever.
How do you choose? Do they have to apply on their own or do you target certain people?
We target certain people. We want the shooters. We target certain people. And when I tell you this work ain't easy, I said I've never met a psychopath, right? I done met some people like a few degrees up.
Just shy.
But that's the challenge, because if we get them right, we keep the community safe. Because guess what now? Violence isn't proximate or contained no more. It's breaching its borders. Chicago having issues downtown on the Magnificent Mile up north. It's spreading out to the surrounding suburbs. It ain't being contained no more. At one point, we was kind of scared to walk outside of these little 4 blocks that we was confined to. Now people moving around now, because it ain't nothing here. But they moving around and they taking their same mentality with them.
When you relocate them to other states, at what point is that? Is that the reason for that is because they're in a good state and you want them to go somewhere else?
Usually when we relocate somebody, because it's a threat on their life. People has paid money to kill these.
So they have to hide?
Well, pretty much. If we don't get them out of state, then they're gonna end up dead. And we got certain organizations through, particularly in Atlanta. Iman has a grain entry program in Atlanta that does a housing program. So it was a young man named, I call him G. He came to me about 3 years ago and somebody suspected that he shot their mother. And they were definitely intent on killing him. We sent him to Atlanta. He been down there thriving ever since. Working, he got his own house, you know, doing real good. And he's alive
And he's safe.
and he's safe.
There's no way for them to find out.
Well, we mediated that situation too. Yeah.
Okay.
So the young man who thought he had shot his mother, we got him involved in the program too. But that was after we had sent G out of town. See, we can't keep nobody safe if we don't identify their risk. And identifying their risk, we got to start working with that factor as well. Because if he poses a risk to you, you pose a risk to him, right? I just can't work with you and leave this out here to continue to be a problem. So.
One more question. I did tell the man that he only had to speak for 20 minutes.
Oh,
Quite a while now.
Don't,
Oh, hey,
yeah.
that's on you.
I've got an
Yes.
online question, if you know.
Go ahead.
Person asks, I'd love to know how we as privileged white adults create trust and sense of true empathy with young adults of color to better influence them in the right direction.
Oh, that's a good question.
It's actually Tish's daughter that
That's-
asked that
Oh,
question.
I have a
so-
whole thing that she wants to say.
Oh. Oh, wow. Oh, man.
And I know why she asked this question.
Can you repeat that? Let me try one.
Yeah, how as white privileged adults can we create a sense of true empathy with young adults of color and better influence them in the right direction? The reason I think she's asking that question, I'm a principal of alternative school, and we serve a lot of students of color. And I think she's wanting to know, we don't look like anything like our students. How can we create that sense of trust and empathy with those types of individuals?
I think in this, white privilege is something that if you can identify the fact that you have privilege because you white, then that puts you in a better position of having empathy. In the school system, I remember reading a scenario one time. It was true. I forgot what it was. We was going through a training. It was a real situation, but it was a scenario. How do we deal with it? Or how this got kind of messed up. There was a young guy who came into the class one day, running late. And he had been late maybe all that week, right? As soon as he got to class, his teacher was like, get the hell up out of my classroom, you know? And he blew up, went off, you know what I'm saying? You know, but the teacher didn't realize he was homeless, you know, and didn't have a way of getting to school. She basically judged him, you know what I'm saying? It was like, if you understood his situation, maybe you would be able to be more understanding of the fact that he showed up. And because sometimes he shows up late and no one is really trying to support him, he comes in with an attitude. And his attitude is basically interpreted as, you got a problem, you need to correct your problem, you know. But I think when it comes to, I watched this documentary the other night called Everything Is Gonna Be All White. Y'all should watch it. And it talks about the white privilege, you know. Sometimes when we have, watch the Colin Kaepernick documentary. Very good, because even him being raised by white parents, they couldn't understand and see the world through the lens that he saw it through. I remember they was driving and his dad would take him to these baseball games and he let him drive one day and he was pulled over. And the dad was like, you know, he just doing his job. Like, no, like I'm being profiled and you can't see how I'm being treated different. You're never treated that way. You will never be treated that way, you know? And basically, I think the only way to get, you know, people to trust you in spite of the fact that you may have privilege, if you utilize your privilege against people, you'll never build trust. You know, you got to try to understand people, because sometimes it may come off as if we complaining, we crying about situations that for all intents and purposes, it don't exist in your world. But it's very much present up in our face every day. When I get pulled over by the police, I do not want to get pulled over by the police, because I literally feel like that may be the last day I will live on earth. I don't know how this situation is gonna go. I make sure my hands are same. I don't know what his, frame of reference is towards me. He's not the guy living next door to me. The police that works in the community, let's say, for instance, I used to live in Inglewood. I'm in the next neighborhood over from Inglewood, Chicago. Most of the police work in Inglewood is from Mount Greenwood.
Yeah.
Anybody know anything about Mount Greenwood in Chicago? Like, they come in with a whole different mentality. Great-great-great-granddaddy was a patty roll. You know what a patty roll is? They were slave catchers. That's where the institution of law enforcement come from, patrolling slave plantations. And it turned into law enforcement. So they come in with the patty rolling mentality from Mount Greenwood and Inglewood. And if anybody who has white privilege tell me, hey man, you need to just comply and shut up, you know what I'm saying, when you pull it over. Even if I decide to ask me, hey, why are you pulling me over? I have a right as a citizen, right? But that's a whole nother experience when white people get pulled over by the police. I didn't see white people cuss the police out and drive off and have a nice day. It's just a different. I'm glad I could talk. I'm glad you guys are interested, because white privilege, it exists.
And it can be used toward equality.
Absolutely. But it has to also be understood that that's almost like a birthright to be born with white skin, to have that privilege that black folks will never have. Right. I don't care. Barack Obama, and I'm gonna use this word for all the time, we family, right? I feel like we family, right?
We're good.
Barack Obama do the wrong thing, his nigga card will be pulled.
Yep.
Real quick. It happens. It happens. Because this is just how America is. But if you understand that it's like that, then we can move forward. We can understand how I can be more helpful to someone if I'm able to put my privilege aside. It will give me a better position to be more empathetic towards what's going on, because you see, they are not granted the same type of privilege in certain situations. And we feel that, like, it's kind of hard living sometimes being black in America. I got when I live here now, I gotta be careful rolling through Rolling Brook on a Sunday morning. I see the police, I got license, insurance, and everything. That don't give me a certain level of confidence that things won't go bad.
Right.
I wonder too, with Miranda's question, what I thought about first of all, you gotta get out of your head that you're gonna fix this kid and you're gonna do it, and shut up and listen and ask that kid, tell me your story, tell me about you, and just shut up and listen. That's the only way I think you can build empathy, is to really see somebody. What the sermon was about today, really seeing somebody, right? So, yeah.
You have to step away from the idea that you have the answers.
Yeah, no judgment, let go of judgment, yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult though, because when I have those conversations with kids, I want to listen, but there's a trust factor. They've been burned so many times, unfortunately, sometimes by principals, administrators, teachers, police officers, community members. They've been burned so many times that trust level isn't there. And what I found is I can't give up. And sometimes I'm never going to get through. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5, 12 times. But we get there.
And I was thinking about your documentary, I think one of the things that impressed me so much in the documentary was the recognition that you had about how tough this work was, and you're not gonna win them all. Your definition of success had to be different from what a lot of people think of as success. And that you came to an understanding, it sounded like, which I think is so valuable, that the things you do may not work, but they might be part of something someone will take over later.
Absolutely.
And that's, you know, I think we all have to think that way all the time, that we can't fix the world, but we can do our bit and pray that someone else will take over.
I live by this model. You can't measure the success of a conversation.
No.
Because what you say today, it may appear that people aren't listening, but once they walk away, because whatever that conversation was about, they may have now the proper way of dealing with something later on
Expressing.
because of what you guys talked about. And you will never know
Right.
that you help somebody in that way. But if you,
And
like,
just as easily, you can damage them.
absolutely,
conversation.
you could be like, or the respond like, he ain't worth talking to. You know, I didn't talk to him going for, I didn't give up.
I give up trying to help.
Yeah, you know, I know with young people, dealing with the young people that I deal with, I realize I deal with two identities, always. I deal with the individual person, and especially when they get in the group, I deal with the group identity. And the group identity is gonna really weigh heavy. It's gonna win the day when you're dealing with a group. So you start picking people off individually, you get to know them for who they are. And then once you understand who they are and they understand who you are, then you can address that group and be like, no, we're not gonna be doing that. You ain't gonna be posturing for everybody. You know, it's like a classroom. You're dealing with an identity that they bring into that classroom, an energy that they bring into that classroom. People are posturing for each other. They think that they gotta be a certain type of way. A lot of people are in prison in early grades because of the perception of what's left in other people's mind. There has been, like, somebody call you a punk in front of 20 people. I can't let 20 people think I'm a punk. Then I end up doing something that's gonna send me to jail or get me killed. If I had enough security of who I am, that person can't define me, right? So now I'm able to walk away. You call me a punk, okay. Let me walk away and be great. Because in this moment, it's easy for me to allow the perception of other people to leave a lasting impression of what I think they may think of me. Then for me to say, I know who I am, you know, what you're saying don't mean nothing, you know. And 9 times out of 10, the people who standing around, they're not gonna judge you based off how you responded in that moment. You
That's
know,
very hard for a teenager though, because as a teenager, you're all about what
Peer
your
pressure.
peers think of you.
Mhm.
That's how you define yourself.
And that's why we gotta work harder to helping them to understand who they are. That's why you have to work so hard at building individual relationships. You know, we deal with, in our schools, we may have 50 kids in the class. You gotta deal with that whole classroom, and you got all this energy coming at you. And to your point, it's like, how do I, if I'm a white teacher and I got 50 African-American students bringing a certain energy, how do I build relationships to where I can teach them without making them feel like I'm judging them? And I'm dealing with, I lost the identity of the individual. I'm dealing with the group now. And they bringing their traumas and their experiences and their circumstances into the space every day. Am I qualified to really teach them? Because it ain't about, you know, reading and writing and adding and subtracting.
About growing up.
It's about connecting, understanding the humanity of people. You know what I'm saying? And that's how you reach people. To understand their humanity, you gotta look at your humanity. We all human. y'all bleed the same, we share the same amount of time in the day, the same oxygen, air and all that, we bring it in, you know? So we gotta understand people's humanity. And if I'm a the effective teacher coming into a community that I may not really be from, I gotta understand what brings, what comes with that. Teachers don't go into homes and visit their students at home. If I was a teacher, I think that would probably be, because we deal with guys, we go into their home, we look at home life, we see what's really going on there. How often do a teacher go into their students' homes just to see what's,
I didn't want to see the parent of the crazy kid because the parent was probably crazy.
but why? What made that parent? That parent as a child. You got parents that they can only pass along what they've been doing. I know people who mama that had 5 boyfriends and all 5 of them were molested. And now they crazy. Because mama probably been molested by all 5 of her mama boyfriends. So when you say he crazy and she crazy, what do we do to understand their trauma? That ain't crazy. That's judgment. Because now I'm already saying, I don't want to deal with them. But you don't know what created that in them. They need help. So instead of me helping them, I'm judging them. And you just somebody else that gave me a reason not to trust nobody up in here.
In my job, I've done some home visits. And it has been some of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. You go to that home, and within 5 seconds of walking the home, like, now I got it. Now I understand why this kid is the way that he or she is.
And it helps you deal with that child different.
Yeah. And they look at you different too. You had the guts to come to my house.
Right.
Now you see where I'm from and what I deal with. When school is a safe place for me, it's the place where people care about me. When I go home, it's not safe. You know, I have several kids that have contracts on, and when they're at school, there's this unwritten rule. Nothing happens in the school. But once you step outside of that school,
Anything goes.
yes.
If you see a flower not growing, you ain't gonna fix the flower. You're supposed to fix the environment in which the flower is supposed to be growing in. The flower ain't broken. It's just in a messed up environment. You know, and I
That's
don't
a
mean
great
I
explanation.
don't mean to pick on
It
you,
is.
Right.
but when we see people as crazy,
Yeah.
we dismiss them.
Yeah.
And we don't offer the type of help that needs to help them through
Right.
whatever they issues that, I mean, that's just our judgment of being crazy. That could be a real problem. It's being masked
Mhm.
through that type of behavior.
All right. I want to thank you, Billy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for sitting here with and interacting with Billy. And for those of you who saw all these sons, that is in the process of getting a distribution deal. But until you can see all these sons, you should read Until the Lion Speaks. And thank you.
Thank you for sharing your life experience with us.
Thank you for doing the work you're doing.
Yes.
It's definitely needed. I mean, the work is not easy. It's not easy.
In the documentary,
We deal with the crazy.
Yeah.
On behalf of St. Benedict and this organization ministry, Grace and Race, we'd like to present you with a